everybody for having me here tonight. I didn't even know about this event until last night, so I'm glad to have made it last minute. Anyway, let me give you a little bit about who I am and how it is that I am here tonight running for Senate. I was born in Haven, although I didn't grow up in Connecticut. I lived here for a while, but I moved around. I lived in New York City, I lived in Florida, and spent most of my adult life in California. I came back to Connecticut in 2004. I've been here ever since. I went to college in UC Berkeley in Northern California. I was the only person in the dorm to have a life-size poster of Ronald Reagan. And didn't win me any points with the ladies. But anyway, I moved back down to Southern California. I started out in the investment business. I've been in the investment business my entire life. I worked for a couple of small firms initially, and then I got on board with a major Wall Street firm that just recently went bankrupt. And fortunately, they were the one firm that did not get bailed out. That was the one thing we did right. But the reason I left that firm was because I became very convinced that the retail investor was really getting screwed. And I didn't like the idea of selling investment products to my clients that I really didn't like. And so what I wanted to do was be able to give investment advice unencumbered by pressures from my bosses who wanted me to sell certain things. So I kind of went off on my own, and I started working. I had a one-bedroom apartment in downtown Los Angeles, and I just started working there, and I started cold calling. And after a while, I became very concerned about a bubble that I saw in the NASDAQ, particularly in the dot-coms, the internet stocks, and I spent every day cold calling names. I was making hundreds of calls a day, trying to convince as many people as I could to sell out their tech stocks and their internet stocks. I said the market was going to collapse, that it was a scam, and people were going to lose a lot of money. And I got into a lot of arguments. A lot of people were very irrational. They were caught up in the new era. They were convinced that these dot-coms were going to make them rich and they would go up forever. And of course, some people would make fun of me because I started doing this in 1998. And in 1999 and 2000, many of the stocks that I told people to sell had doubled and tripled and quadrupled, and people would make fun of me. Of course, most of those companies went to zero ultimately. But I was able to get some investors, some clients who bought what I was saying, and I helped them sell their internet stocks, and I bought them more traditional investments with good dividend yields and low PEs. And then when the market crashed, it turned around in 2000, that's when my business really started to pick up. I had a lot of leads. I had a whole list of people that I had talked to, that I had warned about the collapse, that had ignored me. And so I called them back and reminded them of that. And I started to get a lot of clients, and my business took off. And I was still a one-man show. Up until 2000, it was just me. I had moved into an office. I wasn't in my apartment anymore, but I had no employees. Fast forward to 2008, I have over 100 employees. I have 6 offices. My headquarters are here in Connecticut in Westport. But we have about $2 billion now in customer accounts. I not only do retail investing, I do asset management, I do investment banking. And I think what's very unique about my experience and my qualifications to be a senator at this point in time is not only am I an entrepreneur, not only have I employed people and put up with government regulation. The securities industry, for all you hear on television, doesn't need more regulation. It is heavily regulated. In fact, there is so much regulation right now in the securities industry that if the regulation that exists today existed when I got started, I never could have started my own firm. I couldn't have afforded it. I now employ 7 people. The only thing they do is comply with meaningless and useless government regulations. And I pay all sorts of legal bills and accounting bills every year simply to comply with government regulations. I never could have afforded that in the past. And all those rules and regulations, they didn't stop Bernie Madoff. All they do is entrench these large, too-big-to-fail firms and help prevent smaller firms like mine from getting started to compete with them. But not only do I have that entrepreneurial experience, but my business background is all economics. It's finance. It's capital markets. What I'm constantly doing is looking at government policy, not only in America, but all around the world, and try to figure out which countries are doing it right. Which countries are passing laws and regulations and taxes that are going to inhibit economic growth, and which countries are not doing that. To try to figure out where to advise my clients to invest their money. And because of my understanding of economics and the way I look at things from a global perspective, I became very, very concerned about what I saw happening in Washington in around 2002, 2003, 2004. I thought that what Alan Greenspan did and what the government did in response to the bursting of the NASDAQ bubble was completely wrong. They should have let that recession run its course. and the economy would have been in much better shape. But for political reasons, they didn't let it happen. And so they decided to stimulate the economy with cheap money and deficit spending. And I saw the housing bubble inflating from ground zero in Newport Beach, California. And I began to get very concerned. I was writing op-eds in newspapers, I was writing columns on the internet, I was speaking at meetings of mortgage bankers, of realtors, warning that the Federal Reserve was inflating a housing bubble that was being subsidized by Freddie and Fannie that I thought would go bankrupt. I saw people buying homes they couldn't afford, knowing that ultimately lenders would go broke, and I thought there was going to be a major financial crisis when that bubble burst. I became so concerned about it that initially I was going to write a book simply about the housing bubble and all the reasons that it was being inflated and how it was going to end. I was going to call it maybe the coming American nightmare or something like that. But I decided to write a more comprehensive book that dealt with the economy in general, so I had just one chapter on the real estate bubble, although I talked about it throughout the book. And that book was called Crash Proof, How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. The book came out in February of 2007. It's since sold over 200,000 copies, despite the fact it's never been reviewed or advertised. And I think it was the best book that was written to predict the events of 2008. And in 2005, I started going on television. I started going on CNBC. I was probably on once a week for a couple of years. I was going on Fox News. I was going on CNN. I was going on Bloomberg. And I was there to warn about this coming financial crisis. I was saying that we were headed for the greatest recession since the Great Depression, and I said exactly what was going to cause it. I talked about the housing bubble and how it was financed, and how when it burst, it was going to bankrupt the financial entities that loaned all this money to people that couldn't afford to pay it back against dubious collateral. And I was very afraid at what the government was going to do, because I saw the mistakes that they made in 2001 and 2002. I knew how they stimulated the economy then and created the problems of 2008, and I was very fearful that they would make the same mistakes. And unfortunately, my fears have now been confirmed. We have made all the same mistakes. Under President Obama and under Congress, and of course it started under Bush, we have done everything again, all the mistakes that we did. We slashed interest rates, not to 1%, now they're 0. And the budget deficits are off the charts. I mean, we saw the graphs not too long ago. I mean, the stimulus under Obama and Bernanke is much, much worse than what we got under Greenspan and Bush. And so they're creating a much bigger problem. And the reason I want to go to Washington is I want to be there when it hits the fan. Because the real economic crisis, it's not in our past. It's in our future. It might even start before the election. You can't really pinpoint it. But it's going to happen, I think, between 2010 and 2012. We're going to have a much greater economic crisis because of what the government has done. See, right now the economy isn't improving. It's getting worse. All we're doing is borrowing more money and spending it. And the government is pretending that's economic growth. It's not. All that's growing is our debt. Meanwhile, the real industrial base of our economy continues to disintegrate. We're going to continue to lose jobs because there's no more savings to finance the capital investment necessary to create them. Meanwhile, the government is attacking entrepreneurs with taxes and regulations, making it impossible for businesses to grow. You know, I'm an entrepreneur. I employ over 100 people. I don't employ people because I'm a humanitarian. I employ people because I want to make money. And I know that if I combine other people's labor with my capital, I can make money. But you take that profit potential away from me, well, why am I going to hire anybody? And of course, to hire people, I need capital. I have to give them tools. Where does that come from? That comes from savings. Well, we're not going to have any savings if interest rates are 0. We're not going to have any savings if the government is running huge deficits and borrowing everything under the sun, or if the government is guaranteeing somebody's mortgage or guaranteeing someone's car loan, because there's nothing left. You know, when the government bails out a company, the government doesn't have any money. Where does it get it? It has to take it from another section of the economy. And when they do that, they bleed it dry. They undermine the real productivity of the economy. They can always point to the jobs they save when they bail out a company, but they don't see the unintended consequences. They don't see all the more productive jobs that were destroyed because of the resources that were diverted away from other companies to support companies that need to fail. So what I want to do, and I'll take your questions on any particular policy, is I want to be back in Washington to hold our elected officials accountable for the damage they've done to this economy.